Welcome back to part 2 of the Russian Revolution by Oversimplified. If you have not seen part 1 yet, go check it out. I'll leave a thing in the top right here so that you can get caught up to speed on everything that's happened so far. Right now I'm in the middle of a Russia country series where I've been doing a bunch of videos on Russia. I'll leave a playlist also in the top right here. And at this point we're at the Russian Revolution, right? So 1917, things are in an okay spot right now for the Tsar. He has a weird homeless wizard living with him by the name of Rasputin. But things are about to get a lot worse with the eve of World War I, which would eventually culminate in the Russian Revolution itself of 1917. So we're going to continue here, see what Oversimplified has to say, and as per usual, I'll pause and give my comments, and that's sort of how these work, right? If you haven't yet, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. It all helps the channel. Almost there, 1,000 subscribers. It's going to be like in the next couple days, so it's kind of cool to be able to say that there. Thank you for anyone who's been along the journey this whole way. I really appreciate it. If you're interested, go check out the Patreon. There I do exclusive videos where you can just join and say, hey, I want you to react to this completely random thing that probably wouldn't do that well on YouTube, but I'm just curious what you have to say. That's what that platform is for. Thank you all very much. Intro's long enough. Let's get into it.
While Nicholas had been busy playing with his new best friend, tensions in Europe had been rising. It just so happened that in 1914, one Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary went for a drive with the top down in Sarajevo. One thing leads to another, and suddenly Russia found itself at war with half of Europe. A wave of patriotism swept through Russia. The capital was renamed to Petrograd because St. Petersburg sounded a bit too German. Even revolutionaries were getting on board.
Yeah, so it's funny actually that they did that in Russia. I've mentioned this before, but where I'm from, Toronto, in Canada, there's actually a city nearby called Kitchener, Ontario. This was not always called Kitchener, Ontario. It actually used to be called Berlin, Ontario, because there were a lot of German immigrants that came over from Germany and settled that region. But at the time, during World War I, there was a big, what would you say, anti-German fever. And so, so the town was renamed to something more British and royal sounding, so it was named after Lord Kitchener, and hence the name Kitchener, Ontario.
Then, World War I was a big stinky imperialist war, but they didn't want their big stinky imperialist replaced by a foreign one. So pretty much everyone wanted Russia to win. I hope Russia loses.
Yeah, there you go.
Jeez, read the room, Lenin. Lenin hoped Russia would lose because that would help him overthrow the Tsar. As long as he did that, who cares if Germany blows up half the country? And blow up half the country, they did. An inefficient Tsarist government meant there were shortages of just about everything you need to fight a war. And if losing a teensy-weensy war with Japan upset the people, losing a giant Wyatt war like this was much worse.
Yeah, and Russia was very quick to mobilize too. So Russia was one of the fastest militaries to mobilize. Germany thought that they had way more time than they actually did. Germany's plan was, of course, infamously known as the Schlieffen Plan, where, as you can see here, their plan was basically to crash through Belgium because they knew that they would never break this line here. They knew that they would never break through there, so the plan was to crash through Belgium and quickly capitulate the French and then turn east to fight the Russians. This did not happen and led to the trench warfare that World War I is famous for, and was basically a giant stalemate on the Western Front, which led to millions of lives lost. But the Eastern Front was a little bit more fluid, actually, and there was more movement. And let's see how it goes into that.
Much worse. Soldiers were deserting, the economy was imploding, and in no time, Russia was starving. The peasants were getting more peasanty, the workers were getting more workery, all the while Germany was getting more Germanery. Dmitri, we need to win this war. I need someone with a great military mind to step in and take control. You're right. How about General Hickenlooper? How about me? You can't run the war. Who'll be in charge of the country while you're gone? Obviously, my German wife and a homeless wizard. Duh. Nicholas declared himself commander-in-chief and went to the front lines, leaving his German wife in charge while they were fighting the Germans. It wasn't a good look. And because Alexander was so close to Rasputin, people believed that he was actually calling the shots and secretly destroying Russia, and maybe even boinking her. An even worser look. At this point,
and so the other thing too that's important to note is that, his German wife, which yes is true, but all of the royal families at this point in Europe were pretty much all very closely related to each other. So even Kaiser Wilhelm, him and Tsar Nicholas II, they were friends. Like, they had spent time, they'd gone on hunting trips together, they knew each other. And I think a few days before World War One actually started, where the doomsday machine, so to say, was rolling, they were actually exchanging letters or maybe telegrams back and forth, trying to basically prevent war. I've talked about that before in a few other videos, but World War One was not something, contrary to maybe popular belief, was something that was inevitable, unlike, say, World War II, which was arguably inevitable. World War One was just a series of very bad decisions in a time of crisis management that led to, at the time, the greatest human conflict of all time.
A bunch of nobles just couldn't take it anymore. Rasputin is destroying the country. We have to break his magic spell over the Tsar. But how? He's magic.
Murder him.
Dude. Very cool. Hey, it's Rasputin. The sexy party is running a little late, but in the meantime, why don't you try one of these totally not poisoned cakes? Dude, why'd you say it like that? He's totally gonna know they're poisoned now. Shut up. I said they're not poisoned.
Is there any reason he looks like Franz Josef?
Dude, he just ate so much poison. How is he still alive? It must be the magic. Go with plan B. Is he dead? See, Boris? I told you he was the Antichrist and you didn't believe me. Can you shut up for 1 minute and help me roll him up? Are you sure he's dead? I don't know, but I'm supposed to be hosting a charity auction right now. Can we get this over with? Okay, now he's dead. The murder of Rasputin, just like his life, is shrouded in mystery and speculation. He probably didn't really die like that, but he also probably didn't really heal people. He probably didn't influence the Tsar as much as people thought. He probably wasn't secretly destroying the country. But what he definitely did do, even in his death, was ruin the Tsar's reputation. Russia's autocracy looked more outdated than ever, and the Russian people were taking notice. Come on, men.
Yeah, so Austria-Hungary and Russia at this point were considered the sort of backwards nations of Europe that still had really stringent authoritarian monarchies, as well as economically. They were not developed as places like France or Britain or even Germany, actually. And the Ottomans, also famously sort of the sick man of Europe. So the sort of central powers was really held together a lot by Germany. And we'll see as that goes on with the war.
Remember what we're fighting for. No, we're out.
Yep.
World War I left Russia broke, hungry, and exhausted. And with Nicholas acting as commander-in-chief, he was getting even more blame. For the second time, Russia was on the brink of revolution. By 1917, Russia had been fighting...
So technically, too, the Decemberist Revolution would have counted in that, too. Go check out that video if you haven't seen it. So really, that is more like the third attempt, but hey, I digress.
War it couldn't afford for 3 years. They were running out of many things, most worryingly, food. On International Women's Day, 1917, thousands of hungry women in Petrograd were so sick of being hungry that they took to the streets. And it turns out it's not just women who experience hunger, but men too. So the next day they joined in as well. Gatherings on the streets were forbidden, but I'm not sure how you'd arrest 250,000 people. The crowds demanded an end to the war, an end to food rationing, and even an end to the Tsar's autocracy. Now, normally the troops would deal with this kind of thing, but as it turns out, soldiers get hungry too, and they were also tired of having to kill their fellow Russians so much. So entire regiments mutinied in the capital, and they joined the crowd as well, trashing symbols of the Tsar and his autocratic regime. Things were escalating very quickly. Liberal politicians watching the riots in the streets had long been dissatisfied with the Tsar, since he would shut their parliament down anytime they did something he didn't like.
Yep.
They believed the only way to bring stability back to the streets was for Nicholas II to abdicate. The riots continued. The police fired on soldiers. Soldiers fired on soldiers. The workers re-established the Petrograd Soviet. Politicians began arresting the Tsar's ministers. He may have been an autocrat, but he just lost complete control of his capital city. Talk about embarrassing. Nicholas, the troops have turned against us. The people have taken over the city. They've even cut my phone line. Hello? Hello? The phones are down. Things must be bad. I'd better go back there. Nicholas hopped on the next train back to Petrograd, but he never made it to the city.
Yep.
His train was met by military generals and other politicians. What's going on? Nicholas, look man, we need to talk. It's not you, it's us. Aw, who am I kidding? No, it's definitely you. During the whole crisis in Petrograd, the liberals convinced the generals that if Nicholas abdicated, the people would calm down, and the generals were on board. They didn't have time to quell the chaos, because don't forget, they were still losing a global, all-encompassing war against the Germans. And with the military no longer on his side, Nicholas had no choice but to step down. Throughout his entire reign, he had done everything he could to keep all the power for himself, and in the end, that's exactly what left him with none. But then there was a big question.
Ironic, and that happens quite a lot to authoritarian leaders throughout history.
Who would replace Nicholas? Well, his son Alexei was next in line. Hey buddy, Daddy couldn't handle the complex socioeconomic problems of a giant multinational, multi-ethnic empire that's engaged in total war with all of Europe. You think you could give it a shot? Alexei just wasn't ready to be Tsar. Nicholas did have a brother, but given the state of the empire, he wasn't keen either. And so, 300 years of Romanov rule in Russia just kind of came to an end.
Yeah.
The earlier 1905 revolution hadn't changed much, but this new revolution had left Russia without a Tsar. And still, before the year was over, there would be one more revolution left to come. Nicholas's failure as commander of the armed forces was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Do you think maybe you could have done any better? Well, guess what? It's time to find out. In Rise of Kingdoms. Rise of Kingdoms, an epic
you got me.
multiplayer, free-to-play, real-time strategy.
Nice.
Choose from 11 historical civilizations.
That was a good transition.
Now, where
that
was
was a
I?
very good transition.
Oh yeah. Hungry woman, absolute chaos, and the end of the Tsar. Oh, hey guys. Says here there's been a revolution,
Crap.
and the reign of the Tsars is ended. Oh, come on. I missed another one? Why am I even in this video? Well, it's not like you could have done anything. As long as there's a world war, you can't get back to Russia. Who wants to start a revolution?
Yep.
Revolution. Dang it! Despite getting rid of Nick, Russia was still at war with half of Europe. The Germans, however, had an idea. They thought that if they helped Lenin get back, he would cause trouble for the new Russian government. So they put him on a train. Destination, Petrograd. It was a long journey, and while Lenin was cooped up in his train, things in Russia were changing. Workers were taking control of their factories. Soldiers were socking it to their mean old officers. Without a Tsar, a big old power vacuum had opened up, and someone needed to fill it. The liberals proposed they be in charge, and they set up the provisional government. The workers, however, had already begun establishing local Soviets, largely controlled by the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks. And since neither felt like they had the power to oust the other, Russia ended up in a classic dual power conundrum. The two coexisted, with the provisional government becoming the official government, and the elected Soviets issuing orders to the workers and soldiers. This power balance was delicate, and all it would take is one bold revolutionary to come along and give everyone a big-brained beatdown. Oh boy, Lenin's coming home. I can't wait for him to see all the great things we've accomplished, and I'm gonna show him my fan art. Oh look, here he comes now. Shut up, shut up! You all suck! The provisional government sucks, the Soviet sucks, even your fan art sucks! Why does he have to be so mean? In case you couldn't tell, Lenin wasn't a fan of everything that had been happening. In his April theses, he called the provisional government and the Soviets a bunch of big bourgeois bozos. And he kinda had a point. There was still a lot for the Russian people to be mad about. The provisional government hadn't got Russia out of the war, the people were still hungry, and the peasants were still hoping to get more land.
And this was the biggest failure, really, of the Mensheviks and of the sort of liberal Duma that happened, was that they did not see, what would you say? It's not that they did not see the reasons, but they chose to stay in World War I and not capitulate, much to the, I don't know if annoyance is the right word, but much to the, annoyance of the general population and the bad decision that was. However, there were some points for it. So Russia lost almost, I think it was like a quarter of their manufacturing power, tons of their population, and it was really a humiliating treaty that eventually the communists would sign during this point. However, they did not fully get them out of the liberals did not fully get them out of the war, thinking that they could fight on and maybe there would be some chance here, but ultimately they were wrong.
Well, the Soviets hadn't done much to change things either, but even though they weren't perfect, a lot of people did like what the new government had been doing. There was progress. The secret police were disbanded, the death penalty abolished. They even planned to hold elections, meaning for the first time ever, the Russian people could choose their own government.
And that is huge, right? As we found out throughout this country series, right, going through Kraut's on authoritarianism to even the day democracy died, which that comes 80 years later, but in 1993, the idea of the Russian people having free and fair elections at this point was monumental, right? The Decembrists tried to do this, right, and bring in actually an elected government for the people. They ultimately failed in that revolution. And so this was a huge milestone. However, they were still in the war.
To many, Lenin seemed like some out-of-touch weirdo. If Lenin wanted to go from whiny irrelevant zero to a hunky communist hero, he'd need to shake things up a bit. So he and the Bolsheviks came up with a hot new slogan that promised to give the people what the provisional government wouldn't.
Yep.
Peace. Don't like war? We'll end it. Land. You want land? We'll give it to you.
Redistribution.
Bread. Hungry? Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Lenin also called for all power to the Soviets, which meant getting rid of the provisional government and having the Soviets run the place. A communist dream. The people liked these slogans, and bit by bit, the Bolsheviks became more popular. Some Mensheviks even began switching sides. But even though the people thought Lenin's slogans rocked, as long as the provisional government didn't mess up, they'd continue to support it. So let's check in on the provisional government. Oh, provisional government, you've made a big mess. The provisional government lasted for just 9 months, but those 9 months were chaos. The people wanted Russia out of World War I, but Minister of War Alexander Kerensky thought instead of doing that, why not do the exact opposite? If the people saw more Russian victories, they'd have to support the new government, and that went just about as well as you might expect. These heavy defeats worsened the Russian economy and made the hungry people hungrier. And by now, I think you know what comes next. They trashed the place. More looting, more rioting, more violence. It was like the Tsar had never abdicated. Tens of thousands of armed workers took to the streets during some of the worst violence Petrograd had seen yet. And in response, Kerensky called in the troops, who opened fire on the demonstrators. For now, Lenin and other Bolsheviks.
And again, see how it's more repetition, right? It reminds of 1905 Bloody Sunday. Thank you for the comments below. It looks like there's over 25 different Bloody Sundays, at least according to a quick search through Wikipedia. But again, it's just reinforced, right? You have this strong sort of figure that then when the people riot, you try and crush them as fast as possible. And so even this reformist provisional government, which overthrew the Tsar, a family that had been leading the country for 300 years, and still it's quashed with violence. Was it necessary? That's up for you to decide.
Leaders wanted to distance themselves from the violence, but the crowds marched under Bolshevik slogans, and as a result, Kerensky, now the prime minister, took the opportunity to stamp down on the Bolsheviks. Their leaders were arrested. Lenin was accused of being a German agent, and he was forced to flee to Finland in disguise. This sucks! Now I'll never get to have my revolution. Why are you wearing a dress? It's a disguise, idiot! And it makes me feel pretty. Kerensky had successfully dealt with the violence, but he just couldn't catch a break. This increasing support for more extreme forms of socialism, along with the poor handling of the war, alarmed traditional liberals and bougie business boys. To appease them, Kerensky decided to promote a military legend to Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, someone who hated the revolution, loved the death penalty, and was devoutly anti-socialist, General Kornilov. Hey man, thanks for the promotion. That was real swell of you. Of course, with you by my side, who would dare try to overthrow me? How about me? I did not see this coming. Unfortunately for Kerensky, Kornilov hated the liberal and socialist reforms of the new government, particularly the dumb socialist soldiers' committees. The army was no place for undisciplined left-wing snowflakes. Fearing a Bolshevik takeover was imminent, Kornilov ordered his men towards Petrograd to oust the Soviet and take over. Kerensky freaked out, and he needed help. Since he knew Trotsky was finger-licking good at organizing, he and other Bolshevik leaders were released, and they, along with the Soviet, organized the defense of Petrograd. Kornilov had the power of soldiers, but the Soviet had the power of workers, and they did what workers do best. Railroad workers diverted Kornilov's men away. Telegraph workers messed with his communications. They even infiltrated his forces and encouraged the demoralized men to desert. They were also armed en masse, but in the end, no fighting was necessary because Kornilov's coup just fell apart, and Kornilov was sent straight to prison. Everything was coming up Kerensky. Hey, thanks for the help, boys. Couldn't have done it without you. Now that there's no longer any threat, how about you, return all those guns I gave you? No. Oh, no. In order to kill a rat, Kerensky had just given a gun to a bear. A Bolshevik bear. The whole affair was...
That's actually quite a... That's quite an apt metaphor, actually. You can probably apply that to lots of other conflicts throughout human history, is that to get rid of a rat, you gave a bear a gun. Yeah. One thing that comes off the top of my head is when the CIA funded the Taliban. Yeah, right. Like, well, put some more other conflicts down there in the comments. Maybe there's some interesting ones that we haven't heard of here.
It was a huge propaganda win for them. They had defended the revolution, and their popularity skyrocketed. They found themselves elected to the Petrograd and Moscow Soviets, with Trotsky even becoming chairman in Petrograd. They were now in a very powerful position, almost powerful enough for Lenin to return home from Finland and finally stage his long-awaited communist revolution. The Bolsheviks began planning their takeover of the Russian government. Some got cold feet and began arguing against Lenin's armed revolution in favor of a more peaceful approach, and they even wrote newspaper articles about it, which kind of gave the whole scheme away. The Bolsheviks are planning an armed revolution? I did not see this coming. Kerensky began arresting Bolsheviks, and as a result, Lenin and the boys felt they had no choice but to commence the revolution right now. Lenin was back in Petrograd, but was still in hiding, so Trotsky got the ball rolling, using his position as Soviet chairman to organize the Bolshevik militias. Now, if you were to ask Soviet artists, the revolution went something like this. As much as they...
And all those, so that was all done in the Soviet, the socialist realism style. So this was the popular and eventually the only accepted form of really art that was allowed to be sort of publicly published or whatnot. And a lot of that style that's now sort of has some nostalgia, I guess, attached to it. I was recently in Bulgaria, and I was at the Retro Museum there in Varna, and they have all the old socialist realism styles of art. And yeah, that became sort of the predominant style of the Eastern countries, the Cold War countries, so to say. And yeah, you can still see some examples of it today.
I would like you to think it was a glorious, violent, heroic takeover. The truth seems to be a little more underwhelming. The Bolsheviks just kind of walked into key buildings in the city and took control.
Yeah.
Bolsheviks supporting sailors even brought in a huge battleship, but there wasn't really any fighting. Nobody really tried to stop them. In just one day, they took control of the city. Next, Kerensky just managed to escape before the Bolsheviks surrounded the Winter Palace, placing the provisional government under siege inside.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the March on Rome too, where the March on Rome, you would think that this was this massive 1 million man march that Mussolini led, and they were all armed to the teeth, and they made all the soldiers capitulate, and he just kind of walked into Parliament and asked the king to instate him, and then he did. Yeah, March on Rome. It could have been more called a leisurely stroll towards Rome, but hey.
Is it safe to come out yet? I think so. Fear my revolutionary might. Give me that. That night, Lenin came out of hiding to play a bigger role in the revolution. With him back at the helm, they had one more job to do: storm the Winter Palace and arrest the provisional government. And here comes the final showdown. The palace was defended by a force known as the Battalion of Death, who immediately gave up. And just like that, Lenin had won. As far as violent, bloody revolutionary uprisings go, this wasn't really one of them. But Lenin was finally in charge of Russia. He had spent his whole life dreaming of this moment. He set up the first Council of People's Commissars, his own cabinet, with him in charge. This was it, his chance to finally make his communist utopia with equality and freedoms beyond compare. Hey Lenin, before we took power, they were planning on holding elections. Shall we go ahead with those? Of course. You can't have a communist utopia without high levels of political participation. The proletariat should be free to elect who it. What? The social revolutionaries won. We lost.
Yep.
Those don't count. Lenin claimed the elections were unfair, and the Constituent Assembly they created was counter-revolutionary. He presented the new assembly with a motion that basically said, sign here and give up your power. And when the assembly was like, no, Lenin said, see, they're disobeying me. Proof they're counter-revolutionary. Shut it down, boys. Moderate socialists and others weren't happy when Lenin had the assembly closed by force, and when campaigners began taking to the streets, they were fired upon. For Lenin, setting up a...
And again, right? Whether you have the Tsar, you have the provisional government, or now you have the communists. When the people take to the streets, they're fired upon.
Communist utopia was looking suspiciously like setting up a dictatorship. While he was implementing many of the communist policies you'd expect, he was also refusing to work with other political parties and cracking down on opposition.
There's also this weird sort of, I don't know if, you know what, I'll just outright say it. There's this sort of weird cult that Lenin has. There was a Marxist group at the university I went to. They were always fun. There was about like 10 or 12 of them in this Marxist group at Ryerson University in Toronto. And they had this weird sort of fascination with Lenin, as Lenin being like the ultimate liberator and the one that did nothing wrong. And the Soviet Union, it was really purged by Stalin, right? And Stalin was their big enemy, is that Stalin messed everything up. But then when I talked to them about exactly this, the election that happened, they lost. It was a forcible siege of power, the civil war that eventually is going to come in 1921. And they were just kind of answerless. But anyways, this was a few years ago. I'm sure there's some mouthpiece there that can now answer all my questions, but I digress.
Hey Lenin, are you setting up a dictatorship? I'll shoot you if you are. Of course not. What a crazy theory. Anyway, I'm pleased to announce I'm setting up a secret police force to repress and kill traitors. And by traitors, I of course mean anyone not loyal to me. Owie, 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 owie. The assassination attempt made on Lenin's life in August 1918 failed, but in response, the Bolsheviks ramped up their oppression. But while all this chaos was erupting back home, Lenin and the boys were also distracted by another problem. They were still at war with the Germans, and they had promised to give the people peace. So Lenin made Trotsky Commissar for Foreign Affairs, and sent him off to negotiate a peace deal with the Germans. The Germans offered Trotsky really harsh terms, because they were winning the war. They demanded Russia give up a butt-ton of land, something that would be devastating to the economy. Look, I know it's not great, but I think we have to accept it. Are you insane? This will ruin us. Hey Trotsky, you got a big brain. What do you think? How about no war, no peace? What's that, Mr. Trotsky, sir? It's simple. No war means we'll stop fighting the Germans, but no peace means we won't sign the peace treaty either. Then, when the Germans say we've just stopped fighting, they'll have to leave us alone or something. Trotsky, that's genius. I could kiss you. Do you want me to kiss you? Stop asking me that. Trotsky's no war, no peace plan was a huge success. Oh, wait, no, just kidding. It went exactly as you'd imagine. When the Germans saw the Russians had stopped fighting, they slammed 700,000 troops deep into Russian territory with no resistance.
Yep.
Now, the new peace treaty offered by the Germans was way worse, with Russia losing a huge amount of territory, population, and resources.
Yeah, so as you said there, right, one quarter of the population
Russian territory
was lost.
With no resistance. Now, the new peace treaty offered by the Germans was way worse, with Russia losing a huge amount of territory, population, and resources.
1/4 of your industry, right? 1/4. So billions and billions of dollars, the productivity, the amount of workers that have been lost. It was extremely, extremely harsh terms, although arguably the treaties that would come afterwards, particularly the one that was put on Austria-Hungary, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name right now, arguably more harsh, and then infamously the Treaty of Versailles as well. But yeah, the one for Russia was just brutal.
The Bolsheviks had no choice but to accept, and Russia was humiliated. With Petrograd now in an exposed position, Lenin moved the capital to Moscow, just in case. Things really weren't going well for Lenin, and many people were extremely unhappy with the Bolshevik government and its actions. Lenin, you've pissed off so many people that they've united against you. We're under attack. Relax, we always expected some counter-revolutionary pushback. I think we can handle a few angry monopoly men. But Lenin, it's not just the monopoly men. Okay, who are we up against? Well, the liberals, the social revolutionaries, national separatists in Poland, Finland, and the Ukraine, independent warlords setting up chiefdoms, anarchist rebels, the Green Peasant Armies, the Cossacks, the Caucasian states, the Baltic states, the British, the French, the Americans, and the Japanese. Oh, and a legion of Czechoslovakian soldiers seem to have taken over the Trans-Siberian Railway and stolen all the imperial gold reserves. What? How could this get any worse? Oh, and it says here your mother-in-law is coming to stay. No! A variety of anti-Bolshevik forces had united together to topple Lenin's government, and Russia descended into a full-blown civil war. Now, the Russian Civil War was extremely intricate and would really need its own video, but essentially, the anti-Bolshevik white movement gained control of vast, underdeveloped areas, while the Bolshevik Reds controlled the industrial heartland.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to get too into it because, as you said, that's a whole video. And what would you guess? The next video is going to be about the Russian Civil War. But yeah, to make a very, very long story short, the White Army, as it said, there was tons of different ideological factions in this, and they weren't as united as those in the Red Army, as well as they had bigger population and better production too, as opposed to the Whites. But don't worry, we'll get into that video next.
Using this to their advantage, along with the surprising military genius of Trotsky and the shocking disorganization of the White Army, the fortified Red Army gradually came out on top. It was an absolutely brutal conflict, with both sides committing horrendous atrocities. To maintain order at home, the Bolsheviks began the Red Terror, and the secret police would execute tens of thousands of suspected traitors. No one was safe from the violence, not even Nicholas himself. You've probably been wondering what Nicholas has been up to this whole time. Well, after his abdication, he and his family were placed under house arrest. At first, they were allowed to live in their usual luxury, but after Lenin took over, their conditions worsened. The Bolsheviks were just holding on to Nick until they could work out what to do with him, but the Civil War complicated things. The last thing they wanted was for Nick to be freed by the White Armies, and so, to stop this from happening, Nicholas's Bolshevik guards decided to act.
Yep.
It's not entirely certain whether Lenin ordered it, or if the guards were acting on their own volition. But on July 17th, 1918, with White Armies approaching, they woke Nicholas and his family in the middle of the night and brought them into the basement. There, a drunken squad of Bolsheviks murdered the entire family.
Yeah.
Nicholas, the last Tsar, once one of the most powerful men alive, had met a brutal end. But after years of fighting and millions of deaths, Trotsky and his Red Army came out victorious. Wow, that was a close one. Okay, back to creating a communist utopia. How are we doing on that? Well, the Civil War helped create a massive famine and about 5 million people starved to death. There's massive inflation and the ruble is worthless. Hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of railway track have been destroyed. Disease and epidemics have killed 3 million. The population of Moscow and Petrograd has collapsed. Life expectancy has plummeted. Sailors in Kronstadt are rebelling. People are freezing to death in their own apartments and life has been reduced to a constant search for food and shelter. Whoa. Well, this just means I'll have to work twice as hard, day and night, to save the country. Nothing will stop me, short of a couple of sudden strokes. Get the doctor. One thing you have to keep in mind is that everything I've been talking about, the Civil War, the assassination attempt, and Lenin's struggle to maintain control at home, were all happening around the same time, and it must have been extremely stressful. Lenin began getting headaches, insomnia, and in 1922, he suffered 2 separate strokes. As the Soviet Union was officially declared under a strict one-party system, Lenin's health continued to decline, and his ability to lead the Communist Party went with it. Everybody assumed Trotsky would succeed him. He was a great speaker, he'd won the Civil War, and he had a dope-ass train. The last person anyone expected to take over was Stalin. Stalin wasn't a great intellectual like Lenin, or a charismatic war hero like Trotsky. He was, as one Menshevik described him, a gray blur. Someone who operated in the background. Someone who you might not even notice. But it was in the background that Stalin would rise to power. Here's how it happened. After the revolution, all the Bolsheviks hoped to get a cool job in the new government. What did you get? Commissar for War. Sweet! What'd you get? Secretary.
That's a powerful position, though.
Stalin was made general secretary for the Communist Party. It wasn't what he wanted, but Stalin quickly realized that even though it wasn't fancy, it was a powerful position.
Exactly.
As secretary, he had the power to give people jobs within the party. So he would give jobs to all of his pals, who in turn would give him their support. The more...
It kind of reminds me of Martin Bormann's position, actually, during the Third Reich, where Martin Bormann was barely known by really anyone outside of Hitler's inner circle or those in the Nazi high command, though he was arguably one of the most, possibly the most, next to Hitler, powerful people in Nazi Germany, despite the fact that he was basically just a secretary in this matter. But he was able to influence people within the party, within the government, and he was basically running the entire civilian government. Not by himself, obviously, but he was the figurehead of it, and he was able to amass a lot of power. And more importantly, he was able to take information, basically skew it in his own way. Like, for example, when Göring asked to take over the German Reich a few hours after Hitler's nervous breakdown in the bunker in April of 1945, and then skew it into treason so that he could eliminate all his enemies. And he did the same thing with Himmler as well. So the power, the position of a secretary or one of those that are internal in the party is very, very, very powerful, though it doesn't sound as sexy as Commissar of War.
Pals he gave jobs, the more power he got. The more power he got, the more pals he got. Lenin may have been having wall-to-wall strokes, but he was still involved in the party, and he was taking notice. He wasn't a fan of Stalin abusing his position or insulting his wife to her face. Lenin knew he couldn't let Stalin take over, but by this stage, he was just too sick to fight it. Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir. Blah. Well,
yes.
Deja vu. Lenin's last wish was to not let Stalin take over, but by the time he died, Stalin was too powerful to remove.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a theory that Stalin actually repressed this information as well internally, just so that it wouldn't get out to the party. Also, Lenin's last words were "good dog," I think, because his dog brought him something on his deathbed.
He had his remaining opponents arrested or killed. Trotsky was banished and fled to Europe. Eventually, he would be assassinated by Soviet spies in 1940.
In Mexico with an ice pick.
Dear Comrade Lenin has died. We should have a state funeral. No. Let's mummify him and put him on display so people can look at his dead body forever. That's gross. You're gross. Guards? Kill him. Lenin had waited so long to take control in Russia, but he never got to see his communist utopia. His short time in charge was spent dealing with the destroyed Russian economy, World War I, and the Civil War. He was cruel and merciless, but he really did seem to believe communism would make Russia a better place. Stalin, on the other hand, would take the Soviet Union down a different path. If you thought Lenin was a tyrant, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, girl.
Oh no, you
A
haven't seen
secret
nothing
police
yet.
state, a rapidly militarizing superpower led by a paranoid man who deeply distrusted the West, would see the world come to the brink of nuclear annihilation. That's right, I'm talking about...
I've done that video as well. Go check it out.
Remember to click the link in the description below.
Yeah, great video again from Oversimplified here. Stalin. I think I'm going to do a whole piece of original content on him. We'll find out. But yeah, to say I want to do it on the differences between the totalitarian differences between Nazi Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union. But hey, that's another topic for another time. Thank you all very much for joining me. I hope you guys really, really appreciated it. I hope you guys really, really appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it. Anyways, next video will be on the Russian Civil War by Call Me Ezekiel. This one's been asked for a bit. And then I'm going to end the Russia series with Geography Now, Russia. If you haven't already yet, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Go check out the Patreon if you're like, hey, I got this specific Russian video that I really, really, really want you to watch. That's the place. Let me know. Take care, and I will see you guys in the next video. All the best.